ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here in this absolutely exciting day of debate and plenty of talk about Iraq and Iraq's politics. And now we have a very exciting session about foreign relations and our international partners and what they represent for Iraq and the Iraq program. I'm going to be speaking in English, and as this is perhaps an easier way to conduct this panel, so apologies for those need translation, but obviously the translation equipment is widely available. If you don't have one, please ask members of staff. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I'm going to open with a few remarks, then I'll give each one couple of minutes to make an opening remark, then we will have some question and answers, and after that I'll come to the floor and we will try to take as many questions as possible, and hopefully that will be good enough. The session title is Iraq and International Partners, Engagement, Mutual Perception and Shared Vision. Let me go to the vision. The Iraqi government's vision is really simple. It's based on a few simple principles. Most importantly is what it is to build common interest. That's what we want to do. Iraqi government and Prime Minister Soudani's principle on international relations and approach is to create common interest with our partners, whether be it the regional partners or be it our international partners. And through common interest, you can build on that to a very fruitful and engaging partnership that we could have with the friendly countries that we are engaging with. In addition to that, the Prime Minister's also advocated a new term for our international relations, and that is productive diplomacy, i.e. is diplomatic relations that it will produce something, whether be it bilateral agreements, be it contracts, be it cooperation in security, economy, culture, technology, what have you. Iraq has lived through decades of war and needs a lot of help when it comes to reconstruction, when it comes to rebuilding Iraq. Iraq is no longer the ill country that it was. It's a country with a $150 billion budget, yearly budget, but definitely lacks skills and technology sometimes and the know-how most of the time to really rebuild the institutions, to rebuild the country in its infrastructure and so on. We go to our international partners to get this. But we are no longer going to our international partners and saying, please donate. It's more, let's cooperate. We don't need a Kuwait conference for donor countries anymore, as much as we want to come to our international partners and say, here are the opportunities we have, come and become partners with us. We don't go to say, give us money anymore, per se. We are very grateful for all the support the international partners have provided in the past, especially in the past 2 decades. They do conduct very, very important programs, especially when it comes to stabilization programs, development programs, capacity building, and so on. This is still, we are grateful when they offer that, and we would be willing to cooperate fully with that. But at the same time, we recognize that Iraq can offer a lot also. And another point which is extremely important in our international relations is Iraq should not be an arena of conflict anymore. Those countries that have a problem with each other, keep Iraq out of it. And don't make Iraq an arena for your conflict. And this is really something that we tried very hard to make it work. And it is a very important principle of this government also that we want to stay Iraq, keep Iraq outside of your conflict, and actually maybe go one step further, and that is whenever Iraq is capable and able, is to mediate between the conflicting parties. And we saw that when it came to the Saudi-Iran issue, Iraq played a pivotal part in in creating the atmosphere for Iran and Saudi Arabia to sit down together informally in Baghdad, and later on continued by this government, and the end result was a complete agreement that was signed in Beijing, and that Iraq played an important part in this. The same with Iran, Egypt now, that is, the talks between the two countries in very advanced stage. Turkey and some of the Gulf countries, Iraq played a very important part also. So it is an ongoing process. Whenever there is anything that Iraq can help, will help. And that gives Iraq a very important platform on the international stage. So to wrap it up, Iraq is advancing its foreign relations. It's working to improve the partnership and develop this partnership with our international partners. And this new approach should be adopted and really embraced by our international partners. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I will turn to Abu Naji, Stephen, first to give us an opening remark, and I will come to Henning then, and Thomas third. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this kind invitation and the opportunity to talk to you all. And thank you for referring to me as Abu Naji as well. That's very flattering. I will start by, I mean, I completely agree with what you said, and I think we as the UK are following that trajectory. So if you look back to 2016 or 17, we had big programs of aid inside Iraq. So we were giving large amounts of money. For example, we funded healthcare for 4 million people in the destroyed areas after the liberation of Mosul. We don't need to do that now. Iraq is a middle-income country, and what we can bring is not large donor programs, but expertise to help with the recovery of Iraq. And I think recovery is the right word, because what you went through was a terrible trauma. And just as it takes an individual time to recover from a trauma, so it does a society. And the inheritance from that time, the ISIL time, but also the Saddam time, is a very difficult one that any state in the world would struggle to deal with what was left behind by those days. So we have changed from a relationship where we are assisting to a relationship of equals. So in Sharakat Andad in Arabic, that it's a peer relationship of respect for your sovereignty. I say one final thing, which is the job of an ambassador is not to give elegant speeches and to go to nice parties. The job of an ambassador is to advance the interests of his country or her country. Our main interest in Iraq is true stability and prosperity in your country, because we have learned the lessons of history that when there is instability in Iraq, its effects are not confined to Iraq, and they spread across the region, and they spread to affect other people, even to the UK on our cloudy island, which is a long way away from you. It feels like we're very closely attached to what happens here. So we are in the business of working with Iraq, partly because you are a friend, but partly because it's in our interests to do so as well. And that is the partnership that we're trying to create. Is that 2 minutes, or did I talk for too long?
You can go on.
No, I'll close.
Okay, we'll start with that. Henning.
Well, thank you very much for MERI for inviting me to take part in this conference and to be able to speak so many. Also, thank you to Konrad Adenauer Foundation, who set up a wonderful program for me during 3 days in Iraq, and it's a pleasure and at the same time very important for me to be here and to be able to discuss on this issue. I think I'm kind of the outsider on this panel in a sense that I'm not actually living in Iraq, but just coming in from Berlin, so I very much have an outside perspective on the development and the partnership, and try to bring in this a little bit into the conversation, just to explain kind of how the political discussion is taking place in at least Berlin as one of the capitals of Europe, obviously. So we are currently very, very much focusing on crises, instability, in fact, full-fledged war within Europe in our immediate vicinity, the Russian war against Ukraine. We have seen an uprising in violence between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We have seen new spikes of violence between Kosovo, Syria. So in our immediate vicinity, there's quite a lot of turbulence sucking up political focus and energy. And at the same time, we are forced, or it is in our interest, to not lose sight and track of what's happening kind of in the second-tier vicinity beyond those spots. And obviously, Iraq and the whole region is of utmost importance for us in Germany and Europe as a whole. So it is important, and we continue following closely events and being engaged to the extent we can. I think the remarkable or positive thing I would point out is that I'm now speaking on behalf of the opposition in German government. We've been in government for 16 years under the leadership of Chancellor Merkel, who was herself very, very much engaged with events in Iraq and the possibility of us to help stabilize and help to create the vision that you so eloquently elaborated before. But we are equally supportive now from our position in the German opposition to help the German government continue on that track and work closely with Iraq. And we're very happy to witness that the first international visit of your new prime minister took him to Berlin, and that the German government established a joint plan of action to get tangible results out of that cooperation between Germany and Iraq. And again, we're very supportive of that. There's no doubt that we share the vision that you have. However, we do see that there are a number of challenges that we have to work on together as partners with the expertise on the ground, and then always seeing where can all of us as international partners find our role to support Iraq's vision. And I was in Iraq the last time 3.5 years ago, so that was actually my last international trip before the COVID crisis. Took me also to Baghdad and Erbil. And if I compare it to that visit, there's a lot of positive development. You see it on the streets in terms of economic dynamic, in terms of infrastructure investment and so on. But there are a couple of things that either have not changed so much to my humble, small view and perspective, or where you've seen a dynamic that is putting additional challenge. The one thing is, which I think will be medium-term very, very important, also to be able to absorb the fast-growing population and young population to diversify the economy as a means of medium-term stability. And I think this is something where we should jointly look at how's that being possible to diversify away from the very, very high dependence of oil exports and create highly value-added jobs here. The second is to stabilize the internal factors and dynamics within Iraq. That is kind of the very delicate political pattern, but also the interaction, obviously, between Baghdad and Erbil. And I think this is important to keep that in mind as a factor for medium and long-term stability. This is something kind of that I perceived coming here again as after 3.5 years and happy to discuss that. So I think I'll leave it there and very, very much look forward to the conversation and engaging with all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thomas, you're new here, so how you see the things and give us the opening remark.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for all of you being here. This is a great forum, and thank you very much, Farhad and MERI. I want to go back to the title of the session, and there is the word perception. And I know as European Union, we always have a problem, or we are asked about the perception, not ours, but how other people see us. And let me tell you, there is a quite dramatic change that has taken place and is still taking place. First with the Brexit, with all due respect. Secondly, with all the conflicts that Henning has just mentioned, in particular the Ukraine war. This is a game changer completely for us in Europe, in the EU, but also in our foreign policy. And Steve mentioned interests, yes, and it is completely right. The EU always has been perceived a lot as a payer, but not a player, and that's changing. We still pay, and we are still ready to pay, well, with limited resources now, but we also play, and that is increasing. And why I'm saying this, our politicians and our leaders have understood that we cannot be simply everybody's darling. Let me put it like this. We have interests that matter. We have interests that our citizens ask us to realize. And at the very same time, it does not mean that we leave the values, which are tremendously important for the European Union, aside. But this change that has taken place, I would say, the last 2 or 3 years, have also their impact on our bilateral relations with Iraq. But not negative, positive impact. A positive impact because it allows us to focus in our bilateral relations with Iraq, to focus on what really matters. And if I wanted to be provocantly, I would say we have 3 objectives: stability, stability, stability. Because that is the basic for a sound, healthy, democratic Iraq to play an important role in this region. And this region is, or has been for a long time, a region with risks, political, economic, security risks. And we have a fundamental interest, I come back to the interest, that Iraq stabilizes more and more and more. And other interests are obviously also our economic interests. And that is more and more playing an important role. We still combine this with, how I would say, with what we are good in. Not by donations, but by sharing expertise, by working together with the government on capacity building, on standards. And there are so trivial things like technical standards for constructions or for the security and the safety of milk products. Whatever you have, the European Union is very good in all these things, sometimes too good even. So we really would like to work on that and continue working on that with Iraq, plus the regional element, but that is perhaps also something for later discussion. So in a nutshell, yes, we are very happy to be here. Iraq is a partner of growing importance. I'm personally happy about this. And we take this very seriously. And yes, it is a relationship eye to eye and of hopefully very good cooperation.
Thank you, Thomas. Stephen, you share the notion of a relationship based on relationship for equals and respect. In accordance to that notion, do you see Iraq and United Kingdom relationship to go to what extent in a way? How do the two countries could expand on this relationship and take it from here?
So there's a number of areas I'd highlight. So the first one I'd say is trade, which is our trade in the last year has gone up by 85%, which is a lot. As a percentage, that is a huge amount. Now, it started at a low base after COVID, so that's part of that number. But trade is going up, and I think British businessmen are starting to look at Iraq for the first time in a long time as a place of opportunity and not just a place of threat. And that is a change of perception as the security environment improves. And I think we're probably 10 minutes into this panel and nobody has mentioned Daesh yet, which is a wonderful reflection on where we are, as opposed to if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have been the first, we'd have been having a counter-terrorism conversation. And actually we're having a very different one. So trade is one area. And then there are and of course behind trade, you would have economic cooperation and assistance of the kinds that we're talking about here. So if I give a tiny example, we had a team here who are expert in changing tax systems from paper-based systems to digital systems. Now, that's quite boring, but it's really important. And we did this journey ourselves, and it's painful, and we've helped other countries to do that journey, and we've made that offer to Iraq. So there are a number of areas in the economic and trading field that I would point to. I'd also look to the question that I think the central question that Iraq is facing at the moment, far more important than Daesh, is what you might call the economic and demographic problem that you have, that you are currently 40 million people, and by 2040 you will be 70 million people. And the oil price is currently, whatever it is, $90. It won't be that in 15 years' time. So the amount of money that will be available per person will be a lot lower. And that, I think, is the central political and governmental challenge that Iraq is facing in the next 15 years. Now, we can't solve that problem. You know, it's not in our, it's not in our hands to solve that problem. But we can, Farhad kindly talked about lack of capacity or technical know-how, which is part of the legacy of Daesh and part of the legacy of the very difficult series of political crises and security crises that you've had here. The state has not had the ability to develop good systems of governance. So these are things that we can help on at the level of expertise that we have. I would just close this by saying we don't have all the solutions. So as a British official here, I say to all of my team, and I say a lot to people here, as a British person in Iraq, modesty is a useful quality. It is a necessary quality. We have made mistakes in our history in this country, and please don't ask me what they are, because I won't say. But we have made mistakes, and therefore modesty is a useful quality. When talking to Iraqis, this is a combination of the partnership that we're talking about is our ideas of what has worked in other places, combined with your knowledge of, your deep knowledge, obviously, of the circumstances in which you live and your challenges. So that's when we talk about a partnership, we can bring things from outside, but these are not, we're not talking about imposing them on people. We're talking about doing this with respect and with a partnership of equals, working in our own interest. As I said, this is in our interest that this happens. It's not just out of friendship. It's also out of our self-interest that we want Iraq to be genuinely stable. And by that we mean, I think we all would mean, not that I can speak for you, but we all would mean genuine stability, deep stability. Sometimes I hear people say the country was stable under Saddam Hussein. It just isn't true that the country was, it was a brittle stability, which which collapsed in a catastrophic way. It wasn't stable if you were on the wrong end of the Anfal. It wasn't stable if you were sitting in Najaf. It was an illusion. We are talking about real stability based on deep causes. You think that's fair?
Yeah. That's the first time Abu Naji admits cannot solve all the problems. But you're right. You're absolutely right. It's a partnership that you can help a lot, and you do. As we are in advertising mode, so I'm going to allow you to advertise a little also, Henning. You are working on, with the Parliament, on Iraq programs, and you're debating the German presence here in Iraq. As we all know, especially in Kurdistan, German help in fighting Daesh and the Milan rockets and all that was a game changer in defeating Daesh, starting from Kurdistan area and then beyond to go to cross to the other fronts. Now you're debating this, how this debate is going, and how you tie in this into continued partnership with Iraq.
Yeah. So I would say it the same way as Stephen just said. We're here to offer partnership at eyes height, and we were here to partner with Iraq when we had the imminent threat of ISIS and kind of in the deep crisis mode. And in fact, what you described as a turning point of events here in Iraq was also a turning point of the debate of support back in Germany, because in former times we had the policy shared by all main parties not to provide military assistance to a country in crisis. And we've changed that policy in Iraq for the first time, sending Milan rockets and other weaponry for a good cause and for a cause we were convinced of, but changed our policy. And this was actually the first time which now also pays off in the war against Ukraine, our support for Ukraine and other scenarios. But it was important to remember that. And we have always said, and this was again multi-partisan, that the support is both in Iraq's interests and our interests. So we are very, very happy and ready to provide that support and to partner with Iraq fighting this threat and continuing to work on stability, because that is what we're now doing. As you mentioned, these days in Parliament, we're currently debating the extension of the German troop presence in Iraq, always if it's by invitation of the Iraqi government. Of course, that's the prerequisite, which we're very thankful for. And I think there's no dissensus among the mainstream parties in the German Bundestag. So even us from the opposition, we will support this new mandate and make sure that we continue our presence both under the umbrella of the NATO training mission mainly based in Baghdad, as well as the training and advising component here up in Erbil. And we are always in continuous conversation about how to restructure that, how to rebrand it so that it caters to the need of the Iraqi institutions. For us, and I was saying that in bilateral conversations I had earlier this day, we have a political necessity to renew such a mandate year by year. We have an annual vote in the Bundestag, but it's not meant to be revisited every year. But we understand our presence as a longer time joint partnership where we play our role wherever it's demanded and needed. And this is what we try to do, advising security institutions, try to make sure that Iraq has, say, the framework conditions to sustain longer-term stability with its own means and not requiring us. But we are ready to stay for as long as it takes.
Thank you. Thomas, EU allocated 420 million euros for stabilization program in the past few years. Is there any more of this kind of programs in the pipeline, and how did it contribute, and what is next?
There's nothing more at the moment in the pipeline. We have the so-called multi-annual indicative framework. You mentioned the amount. We are entering now the second half of this part of financing. We have agreed with you partially on very concrete financing actions already, and for the other ones to come, we will have we have to define them in more narrow terms in the coming period. Together with some member states, also Germany, that help us co-finance for you. The mechanism in Brussels regarding financial aid to beneficiary countries, cooperation countries, is the one as it is. We have a 7 years planning. It's linked to our budget as well. I would say my preoccupation is much more that we use the funds to the full extent and to the full purpose we have agreed upon to use them. Yeah, and that is where we are. There are many, many good ideas. Don't want to go too much into detail, but private sector development is one of the key elements, and it is a big part. It's a huge pot of help that is available. And there, yeah, I would say there was the total perfect harmony on my right side here now when it comes to the partnership with Iraq. In that sense, we also have expectations to Iraq. We want you also to work with us on our objectives, very clear, as I said earlier. Yes, the financial aid will come, and we will do this together. I have no doubts whatsoever. As I said, we have to find best quality. You mentioned productive diplomacy in the beginning. It's exactly that. Then implemented by our tools and by our technical and financial experts. Now, we have also expectations to Iraq when it comes to the region, to regional cooperation. We do not want to overload you with expectations in this regard. But, as I said earlier, the world has changed, and we need candid partners to really do substantial work together.
Well, Iraq is definitely delivering on a lot of expectations these days, and what we were not able to make decisions about in the past, this government is delivering on majority of these decisions, and we can't get into details of it. But I have a good 30 minutes of time left, and I would love to open the floor for the audience to really ask you direct questions. Then better you hear it from them than me. So what I would like to do is I will take 3 questions at a time, but I really want you to ask questions rather than make remarks. That is key component in order that we allow majority of questions and we get the answers from the distinguished guests. I'll start with the first row.
Thank you. Mr. Alaaldin, the opening remarks were remarkable, very remarkable.
Thank you.
Speaking as an Iraqi official about an Iraq that is rich and is no longer awaiting international aid. And these words are being said in Erbil, where the government of this regional, which is a part of the federal government of Iraq, is unable to pay wages for 3 months. Let's not speak about the rest of them, but only in this region we are home to 36 refugee and IDP camps that we in this region are welcoming any type of donation. The question is that, isn't that embarrassing for rich Iraq? Mr. Henning, earlier today I had the honor of having lunch with you. You asked my opinion regarding the problems between Baghdad and Erbil, and it was interesting that you mentioned it has been 3.5 years that you haven't visited Iraq. I want your perspective after all these 3 years, and I want you to give me your opinion. Where would we go if we continue like this in next 3 years?
These were for you and for him, no?
Thank you very much. I would like to say that from 3rd of August 2014, when ISIS attacked Iraq in general and especially in Sinjar, Yazidis suffered a lot. And with the support of our friends, and we came to a lot of recognition. And lastly, there was the recognition of Yazidi genocide from UK. And Mr. Ambassador, he announced on 3rd of August in Baghdad. And before that, I was also attending in Germany the Bundestag for the day of the recognitions. We have a lot of friends which is going day by day the recognition of the Yazidi genocides. How can that help and support Yazidis internally in Iraq and Kurdistan as well internationally? Thank you very much.
First of all, thanks, MERI, for the big chance for everybody to meet here. And this is Dr. Mohamed Wissam. Thank you, Dr. Farhad, for the promising, willing, on behalf of the government, give us a clear, healthy environment coming up. My question is, after 20 years, why the government insists to take care of all the services by itself? Why now asking for the cooperative with the EU or with the international world? While we know, and you, Dr. Farhad, better than me, you know it, this kind of government, all the policy and mechanisms is dependent on the giving the services for the citizen by the private sector issues. While our government take care of everything by itself own. And this kind, who will modify it himself? Our government should modify itself to dealing with the policies for the healthy environment of that. While the other part, I'm sorry, I'm hearing that all the world is helping us sometimes with the donation of budget and weapons. This is something we need to change our philosophy. Thank you.
Okay. You want to take the questions about the genocide as Dr. Khalaf was asking?
Are we to do that? Sure. So the question was about the Yazidi genocide. So just to give you a bit of background, my government recognized that a genocide had taken place this year. We don't make, our policy is that we don't make political judgments on genocide. We recognize when a legal court has decided that genocide has taken place. That's the British approach to this. And when a German court found an ISIL fighter guilty of genocidal crimes, that was our moment to recognize it. That's our approach. I'll say one thing personal, and then I will try to give you an answer to your question. Yesterday, I had the great pleasure of going to Lalish, the Yazidi temple at Lalish, and during a festival. And it was a wonderful experience for me, because every meeting I've had about Yazidis since I arrived in the country has been a very sad and solemn occasion, talking about what happened. And so going to Lalish yesterday and seeing thousands of Yazidis smiling and laughing as they arrived for their festival was a wonderful thing for me, and it felt to me at least like the revival of life after such a terrible trauma. I think this is a question of implementation. So there's two factors here. There's the return of Yazidis to Sinjar, and then there are the reparation payments. I think there's more than that, but let me just do those two. So Sinjar is, like everything in Iraq, Sinjar is very complicated at one level. On another level, it's actually very simple. So in Sinjar, you have a strategic location, you have internal divisions, you have regional competition, and you have international dimensions, all playing out in Sinjar. And that's very complicated to deal with, unquestionably. At another level, this is actually a very simple question, which is, should the Yazidis be able to return home to Sinjar? And the question to that is very obviously yes. The answer to that is yes. Now, getting from here to there, the implementation feels very difficult. The reparations law, it's been done. The decision has been taken. I think there's a real question of implementation of that law. You know, not enough Yazidi survivors have received money yet. Now, there are many complications, and as I said to Dr. Farhad, the government's got huge numbers of challenges that it's trying to deal with simultaneously, and any government would find this hard. So I don't say this out of criticism. I say this just as an observer. It's very hard to get this right. But Yazidi women having to go and retell their stories, to travel across a country and retell their stories in particular courts, risks traumatizing them all over again. And at the moment, they are avoiding doing that. So I think there are technical solutions, and I don't offer them in any way out of criticism, but purely as a recognition that this could be done better. But I absolutely recognize the number of challenges that you're facing as a government.
If I can just very briefly add on that, because there's absolutely no dissensus, but we fully agree, and I'm not as much into the details of the Iraqi debate for obvious reasons, but I absolutely share the view that the ambassador has just laid out, just from a German and I would say more political look at it, because we have issued the resolution in the German Bundestag, again, multi-partisan, so that shows again that there's a broad consensus among main political parties on how we see the events. And basically, I mean, over and above the specific important case of recognizing the severe suffering of the Yazidi community here in Iraq, it's also underlining the importance of respecting minority rights everywhere around the world, basically, but particularly in this part of the world. But it is very closely linked to our own history in Germany, where we committed horrific crimes against specific minority groups in our history. And we've learned from that and know how important the respect of minority rights is for a medium and long-term stability of a country. So this is underlining this specific fact, and this is something we are carrying also as an own experience and a conviction we have to other countries around the world, basically. I mean, talking about one conflict I was alluding to, Armenia, Azerbaijan, is also very much centered around this question on how do you guarantee rights and respect for minorities within one country. I want to answer the question about the financial flows and the question about Erbil-Baghdad Corporation. And I'm trying to be very careful also, because I'm here for just a couple of days and it's just like a brief perception. But what I would say is, first of all, and Farhad said that at the very beginning, it's not about the necessity of providing huge funds of the international community, but Iraq in itself is a reasonable, wealthy country and has financial means to provide solutions for national challenges. In that sense, there should be an Iraqi solution also for providing the financial resources to pay for government officials everywhere in the country, not only in parts of the country. So I think we are supportive of an Iraqi solution in that sense, and it is up to the Kurdish representatives and parts and political leaders in Iraq, as well as the leaders in Baghdad, to find a sustainable and mutually agreed solution based on the Iraqi constitution, obviously, to make sure that there's a sustainable financing. The only thing I would say, and we've discussed that briefly, and this is part of of my kind of experience in between 2020 and now, that the power distribution between Erbil and Baghdad seems to have shifted a bit. If that's temporary or if that's more permanent is to be seen. I think that's just an outside perspective. And my perception is that this is also due to internal dynamics within each camp. I would leave it there, but that's a perception I have.
Thank you. I take Mr. Mohammed's question as 36 refugee camps, and you need help with that. I think that is valid, but Iraq needs to solve this problem as much as before the international community. And if there is an international aid or help coming to that, Iraq is not refusing it. So it is, and actually is working with most of the agencies when it comes to managing these camps. But you agree with me that it's time to come for internal camps to be, as much as possible, not to be there anymore. And these people need to be repatriated whenever possible, and efforts need to be made to that. To Dr. Mohamed's question about private sector, I fully agree. Private sector is key component, and the Prime Minister has been saying this in terms of the next stage of development. Let's not forget Iraq has inherited some sort of socialist system where government is responsible for everything. The government even set up companies to run things rather than give it to the private sector. But actually this government is working on changing that, and that's why it's passing many either legislation or Council of Ministers decisions where it is slowly moving towards private sector and improving investment in the private sector and partnership. And for example, I give you one example. Now is the first time where the government is providing sovereign guarantee for industrial projects led by the private sector. That wasn't there before. So it is, the effort is there, but it's a long way. I'm going to go for another round. This gentleman has been trying to get a question, then I'll come to you. Can we get the microphone, please?
Thank you. Lauk Ahmed, my question is for Stephen. Let us take you back to the title of the conference, Addressing Iraq's Immediate Priorities, and connect it to the vision you already mentioned. Allow me to add one on the list, but feel free to number them. You mentioned trade, economic assistance, maybe business. I will add politics on that list. Feel free to number the challenges so that we can address the objectives of the conference. This is one. Second, small comment. Transition from
I don't want comments. I want questions.
Yes.
So you better ask a question.
So that was the question. No,
you said a
prioritize the
comment.
needs. Prioritize the needs. So is politics number one, trade number two, economic assistance number three. Feel free to.
Okay,
For me, it's politics.
we got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kag Rahman. In every panel, he must ask a question, so I'm going to give him that.
أنا رحمن غريب من مركز مترو للحريات الصحفية. سؤالي إلى سعادة السفير البريطاني. في اليومين الماضيين رأينا تفاعل شعبي ورسمي من قبل قادة سياسيين وتهديدات أيضا فيما يخص الحرب في غزة. هذه المواقف من الفعاليات السياسية ومن القادة السياسيين العراقيين وموقف الحكومة البريطانية المعروف بدعم إسرائيل في هذا الحرب، ألا يؤثر هذا على شراكتكم مع الحكومة العراقية، مع الشعب العراقي، مع القادة السياسيين في العراق؟ شكرا جزيلا.
Just behind you. Vladimir.
My question to the UK ambassador is, what does he think about, is he worried that the issues that are now happening in Gaza, that it could affect Iraq and could lead to a bigger war, and what's the UK policy and basically on that?
That's a related question. Can I have the microphone here, please? Interesting, no female questionnaires. The questions are all male.
My name is Ahmed Farhad, professor at New York University in the United States for 3 decades. My gray hair is my proof. It's a flimsy proof anyway. The title of the session contains the buzzwords engagement and shared visions. Now, in that spirit, I would like to ask the esteemed panelists the following. You have been trying long and hard to see a unified, non-partisan Peshmerga force. The question is, what are the chances of achieving this lofty goal in the near future? And I emphasize near future. Thank you.
Thank you. As you are going to be taking most of the questions, I'll start with Thomas with this question as it is for the whole panel. Can you, both of them, address it briefly, then I'll give the time to Stephen briefly also.
Yes, it's a very good question. But if you allow me, I would actually widen the question a little bit. The whole security sector, if I may say, in Iraq is one of the biggest existing problems that we still have, or Iraq still have. You know very well, and much better than I do probably, that there is still a lack of clear structure in the security sector. Who does what, who has which competence, and how is the whole sector organized. You can start with the military sector, but it goes equally for the civilian security sector. At least on the latter part, we do a quite substantial work here by help of our so-called advisory mission. We have 80 Europeans working here on this security sector reform. This may sound a little bit soft, but at the end of the day, if it helps to transform, and here we are also in the situation of, again, state building, capacity building, if it helps to transform the state into a system where you have executive, judicative, and also defense and a clear judiciary system, I think this question will then be on the table sooner than later.
I would again add an observation kind of from the outside perspective, and I think we also have to understand where Iraq comes from, and that the fight against Daesh is just a couple of years ago. So it's still a process of getting out of this crisis that involved a lot of military force. One of the challenges, but at the same time needs for medium-term stability in every country, but as well in Iraq, is to consolidate the power of the state in terms of security institutions, and once that has been achieved, actually to demilitarize society as well. And I think this is a big challenge for the years to come, or maybe decades to come, for Iraq, to draw down the number of weapons that are free floating within the society and at the hand of people. And this can only work hand in hand if you have a consolidation of power of state institutions, including the security apparatus. So this is what we are basically trying to tackle with security sector reform and our endeavors. So I think this is very, very needed for long-term stability in Iraq, as in every country. One very brief remarks, and I think they were mainly directed at Stephen, but we are again sitting very much in the same boat, and I just want people to understand that what's happening west of here is very, very much linked, as I said before, to the history of Germany and to what we've committed in the past. So I just hope for understanding that in this very circumstances, the German government, and they've made it very explicitly, and again, there's multi-partisan consensus that there's a huge support for Israel to be able to defend itself against terrorist attacks. And this is what the firm position is of the government, of parliament as of now. And at the same time, and we've always been saying so, we try to offer our good services to find a long-term sustainable solution that must be based on a mutually agreed two-state solutions that grants rights and liberty for all the people. So I think this is the basic notion, and this is how we look at events playing out now.
Stephen.
Do you want me to do that as well, or just the two that we're addressing?
No, just answer the questions, but we are running out of time, so.
Okay, so very quickly on the Peshmerga reform, I do think it is possible. I also think it is a function, as the other panelists said, of a very difficult history that you've had. And I think if you describe a process like this as a historian, you would expect things to take 20 years or 30 years. If you're a politician, that's a very difficult message to say to people, oh, it'll be okay in 30 years' time. It's an almost impossible thing to say as a politician, that the problem might take 30 years to solve because people want the problem solved now. They're not patient for 30-year solutions. But some of these problems are very deep-rooted in Iraqi society, and I think that they will take a lot of time. Right, I was asked the two difficult questions. So on the prioritization, I would say the short-term priority is the economy, because the next 15 years, in 15 years' time, you will have 70 million people and a much lower oil price. So there needs to be a consensus across the political establishment that something has to change, and very quickly. There is no time for delay on the need for diversification of the economy and the revival of the private sector. The long-term problem is the climate. And you are at the very edge of the climate crisis. It's happening to you already. It's not a kind of theory. It's not a fear for the future. It's not a prediction. It's actually happening now, and in ways which are dangerous to you. So the very easy example is the lack of water drives young men out of the fields into towns where there is no work. There they are vulnerable to drugs, they're vulnerable to extremist ideologies, they're vulnerable to gangs, and they're vulnerable to migration, unorganized migration to our country. So this has a very, very immediate impact on you, but also on us. The second question, which I think they were linked to the two, the questions about the Israel situation. You asked whether, the first question was whether this affects our relationship with Iraq. I think there's a higher degree of agreement on this than you might imagine. We have a very long established principle of the need for a two-state solution. We think that Israel has the right to defend itself, but inevitably we are saying, and the Israelis would accept this, that this needs to be done according to the laws of war and with restraint. What's happening there is a terrible tragedy. It's a heartbreaking tragedy, and our thoughts and prayers.
You better hurry up,
everybody.
Stephen. The music started.
The music started, so I can stop talking.
Okay, well, as you all hear, the music started and it's relentless, so they are not going to allow us to continue. I would have loved to give another round, but nonetheless, I thank you all for listening, and I thank the panelists for being here, and please thank them with a round of applause.